At Consumer Cellular, you get the same exact coverage as the largest carriers, but for up to half the cost. Same thing, up to half the cost. Up to half the cost for the same thing. 50% the money for 100% the same thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you?
I'm good, Kevin. I'm back up in Liverpool. We're recording this on Wednesday night, so after the show, I'm going to Rudy's, my favourite pizza parlour, and we'll have a quadruple pepperoni in all probability, followed by watching a bit of football if I can find it.
Yeah, although sadly, Kieran, well, not sadly, I mean, we have to congratulate a friend of the show, Tracy Crouch, on her marriage this week, which unfortunately means that pizza of yours may have some hard cheese on it.
Yes.
I'm hoping to nurture you through this, Kieran, because obviously you're very happy on her behalf, but we know how you feel about Tracy. It wasn't to be. You've won the lottery of life. You're married to the Baroness, and you're about to go out and have pizza and watch football. What could be better?
Absolutely. Yes, all the best wishes to Tracy. She's been a very good friend of the show, and she got married on Valentine's Day, so I wish her and her partner the best of all times going forwards.
How lovely. I can't see your face, but I'm sure the smile went to your eyes when you said that. It's Newsday, Kieran, and the first two stories, Premier League club, who didn't do particularly well in the Champions League last night, North London's very own Tottenham Hotspur.
Yes, there's two things. I was looking for a quiet Wednesday. I was on the train this morning.
Hang on a second. Is that you've got me so confused? That's not a Smiths song title, is it?
No, it's not.
I was looking for a quiet Wednesday. No, we're beyond that now. Great, okay.
And then my messages started coming through. So the first story in relation to Spurs is that there is a potential bidder for the club. This is a guy called Jam Najavi. I think he's an Iranian-American billionaire. He owns a company called MSP, Sports Capital, and it already has some sporting interests, including football. It looks like his organisation is going to put up 70% of the bid, and he's hoping to also get around about 30% from private individuals in Abu Dhabi. So it won't actually be anything to do with Manchester City's owners. The price we're looking at is just over £3 billion. So people will say, "Oh, hold on, that's more than Chelsea," and Chelsea have been more successful in terms of winning trophies. So how can Spurs be worth 20% more? And the answer is that Spurs have done all the hard work in terms of future-proofing the business part of the organisation. The new stadium is there. It's got Beyonce concerts taking place this summer. We know it's used for the NFL. It's got the wheel-in, wheel-out pitch. It's making $800,000 a match from catering. So they've done. I would give Spurs, if I was grading them, I'd give them a grade A for the work they've done on the business side of things. Speaking to my mate Paul, he doesn't give them a grade A. Paul, my neighbour, I think he's fairly somewhat unimpressed with what's happening on the pitch. But
my heart. That's the sound of my heart breaking. Did you hear
that? I can imagine. So will they sell? Well, there's two people effectively have to give the nod to this. There's Joe Lewis, who is 86. I think he's doing some succession planning. He has transferred his shares to a trust. Does his family want to continue the ownership of Spurs? That's an unknown. I believe believe his daughter was once engaged to Craig Johnston, as that was a very useless football fact. And of course, there's Daniel Levy. Daniel Levy probably owns about 13-14% of the club, but he is the chairman. He is a totally committed Spurs fan. And we've often said in relation to your club, Palace, that while Steve Parish might be willing to sell shares, he will be very reluctant to give up his role as chairman. And I suspect that's the same when it comes to Daniel Levy, because he's worked tirelessly to get the club to where it is in terms of the training facilities, the stadium. It is a club that is now regularly appearing in the Champions League, but Spurs fans, like all fans, they want to push on even further. So the Levy out faction of the Spurs fan base will be watching this with great interest, as will many others, of course.
You've been saying recently, Kieran, that you think Todd Boehly overpaid for Chelsea, but even allowing for that, you still think this is a fairly reasonable price to pay for Spurs?
I think it is, because if you take a look at the fundamentals, Spurs have always operated a pretty lean club. We'll come on to their financial results shortly, but they were only paying £47 in wages for every £100 of income, which is by far the lowest in the Premier League. If you look at what had been happening with Chelsea, the club had lost $900,000 a week for 19 years. So why pay a fortune for a loss-making business and then increase its cost base even further through, I believe the technical phrase is now splurging on transfers. So I think it's actually it's a fair price. It's not a generous price, but I think it's probably fair. Whoever acquires the club will be inheriting all of the money borrowed from banks to fund the stadium. So clearly there's going to be an ongoing interest cost on that. But the critical thing is, how are Spurs going to generate more money going forwards? Because they don't have the same global fan base as Chelsea. But I think in terms of a property footprint, they've got a far bigger and better one, because the new stadium is an absolute money spinner.
You were, as we know, in our pub before the Palace-Brighton game on Saturday, but you were probably too busy basking in the glow of adulation from several fanboys to take part in a conversation we had on Saturday, where some of us were grudgingly admitting how well Brighton were doing, and also saying that perhaps Palace are punching a little bit above their weight to an extent. But also, we all agreed that it seems now, Kieran, that teams at the higher level, teams who want to be in the top six, seem to think that the only way to compete with City, basically, in Chelsea, is by having a billionaire, having somebody even richer than the person who owned you take over. And it seems to me that in a year or two, it's going to be even more difficult for clubs like Palace and Brighton to compete, unless, of course, their own overseas billionaire or nation state takes over.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've mentioned Delia Smith, in terms of her control at Norwich, and Delia is very successful. There's many people who are very grateful to Delia's old cookbooks that saw them through university and so on. But what we've seen in football is that it's been a constant ratcheting up, that the millionaires have been replaced by the multimillionaires, who are now being replaced by the billionaires, but the billionaires are now being replaced by the multi-billionaires. And even if you end up with 20 of these people in charge of Premier League clubs, there's still going to be 3 clubs relegated. There's still going to be 19 clubs that don't win the Premier League itself. So it's becoming a more and more expensive business to run a club, and fans are becoming increasingly demanding as well, because there is an expectation of success, especially when they see players coming in on huge contracts, on big transfer fees. But even so, if a £60 million player is only worth £60 million if they deliver. And what we are seeing increasingly is a Premier League tax when Premier League clubs come into the European market. And it looks like quite a few of those clubs are willing to pay that tax and potentially overpay for the players that they acquire. I was looking at the numbers last night, and Premier League clubs are owed £600 million in respect of money due to them in terms of outstanding transfer instalments, but they owe on their own, effectively their transfer credit cards, 1.8 billion. So that indicates that the Premier League owes a net 1.2 billion to people outside of the Premier League, and that's mainly going to be European clubs. Not many of it is filtering down to the EFL these days, which is a cause for concern. You think about the number of players who are in the England team who have been loaned out or have been signed from EFL clubs, but that seems to be drying up further and further because everybody wants instant success, and that means signing established players or sort of grabbing kids from academies for pittances through the elite player performance plan.
Yeah, sadly, Kieran, some of us were thrown out of university before we could get Delia to teach us to cook. Some of us had to live off our own devices, Kieran, earn our own living, buy our own takeaways, but it's a long story. I should probably let that go now, Kieran. It's several decades ago.
Never let it go. Grudges are for life, not just for Christmas.
As you indicated, Kieran, what looks like some fairly decent results from Tottenham Hotspur this week. Revenue.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said Spurs and Burnley, in my view, are the two best-run clubs financially in the Premier League. And we look at these figures, and Spurs' income is up, a good 20%, mainly due to the fact that White Hart Lane, the new White Hart Lane, is now open, and that they are able to fill it for a full season. So they generated over £100 million from ticket sales, and that's despite being in the Europa Conference League, where it's especially in terms of you're trying to flog tickets for the hospitality boxes. If you've got Bayern Munich or PSG or one of the big clubs coming to White Hart Lane, then you can get a really good price from both your regular fans and also the hospitality people. If it's the Thursday night in the Europa Conference and you've got the third best team in Denmark or Albania or somewhere like that, it's much harder. So therefore, you have to go and charge prices accordingly. So I think Spurs in a good Champions League year, and clearly they've now got to the knockout phases. I'd expect that figure of £106 million they earned last season to be higher this year, if they make further progress. The wages are under control. With the exception of wages at one position. Spurs now have the highest paid director of any club in the Premier League. Daniel Levy's took a not inconsiderable £3.25 million. And I was on a Spurs podcast the other night, and I think there were one or two eyebrows raised because I think he's a really smart businessman. But I don't think his communication skills are necessarily the best, and that's perhaps where he's allowed his enemies or his opponents to score one or 2 points. They have spent a lot of money in the transfer market. They spent £160 million last season, but they've signed a few duffers. Quite a few of those players have gone out on loan. So this adds further support for those who think that Spurs is very good as a business, but not necessarily that great at being a football club, and that's further increasing the anger amongst the fan base.
Well, Kieran, we have some good news. If you are a fan of the third best team in Denmark, or indeed you're one of those anxious Palace and Brighton fans we spoke about, it emerged over the weekend that if plans all go ahead, we could be one of about 148 teams in the European Super League.
Yes, this is the announcement by A22. This is a very strange consultancy organisation, which is the Lord Haw of the European Super League, in my view, who have come out with a very impressive sounding 10-point plan for a new European Super League, which they say will be far more meritorious than the initial plans. There'll be promotion and relegation. There'll be far better distribution of money, and so on. So I've always taken the view, if something looks too good to be true, it tends not to be true. And once you start digging into the small print, you go, oh, hold on. There will be 4 divisions, but if we take a situation such as Leicester winning the Premier League in 2016, when Leicester won the Premier League, they went straight into the Champions League the following season, as has always been the way that football's been organised historically. We remember the old European Cup where it used to be the champions, and then the Champions League came along, and it has become diluted to allow more clubs from individual countries to participate. But if Leicester won the Premier League in 22-23, what they would then have to do is to go into a playoff system against some other clubs in Europe, and it looks as if this new competition will have 3 clubs relegated out of, I think it's going to be 4 divisions of 20, so 3 clubs will be relegated, a bit like what we see between the EFL and the National League, and then Leicester would have had to start in Division 4 of the European Super League, and it would take them 3 seasons of success to get to the top division. And you might say, well, that seems very harsh on Leicester. They did fantastically well in 2016-17. I think they got to the quarterfinals of the Champions League that season. This system is designed to protect the elite. Because when it's set up, we can all guess who's going to be in Division 1, and you won't have to be an idiot to realise that all of the TV money is going to be concentrated in Division 1 as well, just as it is in the English football pyramid. So you'll get diddly squat if you are Leicester. You win the Premier League and you get up. And there's also the quite ludicrous position that if, say, Chelsea or Liverpool, and I know that they've had a bad season by their standards, but they're still 9th and 10th in the Premier League. Let's say the worst happened, and a big club, a Chelsea or a Liverpool, was relegated to the EFL Championship. They would still keep their place in the top division of the Super League, and it simply makes a mockery. Now, Chelsea and Liverpool aren't going to get relegated, we know that, but the thing that they want most of all is to de-risk their current positions, to ensure that they don't have to win matches domestically to be guaranteed European income year in, year out. And these plans go along those lines. To be fair to the Premier League clubs, they've been absolutely silent when it comes to the pronouncements of A22. I think they know that if they even were seen in the same city as the sleazeballs in charge, then the tongues would start wagging. So there's no evidence that Premier League clubs are interested in this competition. It looks initially if it is simply a new voice piece for Florentino Perez and Agnelli and the usual suspects at Barcelona as well, to try to soft soap people into believing that this is some form of democratic competition. And it could be that we actually have a continental Super League which doesn't involve English clubs, because one of the big fears and one of the things which is making the likes of La Liga and Serie A clubs a bit arsey is that they can't compete with the Premier League, because the Premier League is the European Super League in terms of the amount of money that it generates. So if you let Manchester United and Liverpool and Chelsea and City and so on into the European Super League, they would have the best of both worlds. They'd have the money guaranteed from Europe, and of course they'd have the money from the Premier League itself. So it looks like an absolutely awful hodgepodge of a proposal. Mainly because it is an absolutely awful hodgepodge of a proposal. Although, as we say to everybody, if A22 want to take issue with that, they're more than welcome to come on and have a chat about their proposals. We're a great believer in open access and see what they have to say.
I don't know how Producer Guy would go about getting in touch with A22. You'd have to wait for all the minicab companies, first of all, to start with A. I also don't know where to begin explaining Lord Haw to younger listeners, so I suggest you Google him. He was a Nazi propagandist. Spoiler alert, he dies in the end. The Premier League, Kieran, two big stories for the Premier League, the first of which is less impressive than the second.
Yes. There have been some accusations that the Premier League was very anxious, having had a 4-year investigation, was very anxious to charge Manchester City before the government white paper was announced. And the government white paper was originally due out last week before the Prime Minister decided to have yet another reshuffle. And I think we're on now, is it 12 sports ministers in 11 years, which is, it is a bit of a revolving door position.
Well, it's a team. It's a team, Kieran. It's a full team. So that counts. Yeah. When they get up to 23 sports ministers with a lot of squad, so that's good.
It's a bit like VAR. I've always taken the view that if a referee makes an error, it's an honest error.
Yeah.
I see some ludicrous allegations of referees, but having refereed myself and I know a few referees, you always give what you see, and also you give those decisions in real time. And one of the reasons why people are a bit upset with VAR at present is that, yes, you can make an error in real time, but if it takes you 3 or 4 minutes and you still make an error, then that's not very impressive. But when it comes to the Premier League, they've had 4 years to finalise these charges against Manchester City. And it turns out that I think at least half a dozen of them had to be changed. Because the Premier League, who you'd expect to be familiar with its own handbook, managed to get things wrong. It got section numbers wrong in terms of some of the individual charges. Now, again, in defence of the Premier League, I'd say here that some of those charges are pretty peripheral. That they're not. I don't think they're going to be, smoking guns in any way, shape, or form. But I think it's further support for those people who think the Premier League is now moving to a lobbying position. We know the Institute of Economic Affairs, that unusual organisation, which appears to have links with industries such as the gambling industry and big oil and so on, that they are all of a sudden getting interested in football. There's been some people connected with recent elections, running election campaigns, who seem to be they're coming up with opposition to the independent regulator and so on. So, the view that the Premier League just tried to get this out and didn't check its own homework, this is something you should be getting right 100%.
Yeah, I mean,
and the Premier League just came out with a really sort of pompous and sniffy comment today, directed at PGMOL in respect of the errors made at the weekend. Well, those errors took 3 minutes. If the Premier League's taken 4 years and has made errors, I've not got a lot of sympathy for it.
Yeah, this time last week, Kieran, we had an in-depth analysis of the Man City situation, and there were many people who, perhaps understandably, I don't agree with them, but they thought that we spent too much time talking about potential issues from other clubs, potential issues for the Premier League, their motives for doing it, rather than an actual investigation into the charges themselves. But there's no doubt this damages the credibility of the Premier League's case, and also there's no doubt that the silver-tongued friends that we know so much about will be jumping on this already, won't they? I mean, it puts the Premier League on the back foot right from the start, it seems to me.
Yes, yeah. If you're going to charge somebody, then make sure you get the charges correct. There are many Mr. Loophole lawyers, many Saul Goodmans around, who would be sort of raising their eyebrows and also looking forward to this. And also, to be fair to the Premier League's own lawyers, they want to be able to go into that first day and say, here's the 115 charges,
course, yeah.
whop. And the fact that 6 of them have had to be changed because the Premier League cannot read its own handbook. And I spend a lot of time reading that handbook, Kevin. And if I can do it and I'm unpaid, do you think that the Premier League would be able to read its own handbook?
Now, I thought I'd asked you this question last week, Kieran, but it turns out, on checking with some friends of mine, I asked you it in the pub on Saturday, which means a lot of people won't have heard it. But so we talked, if we say there's 115 charges for the sake of argument, so what will happen at the end of the case is there's not going to be a generic guilty or not guilty verdict. So each charge will be read out and there will be a guilty or proven or not proven, whatever, but each charge will be taken on its merits and there'll be a different verdict for each charge.
Yes, they're all independent charges,
right.
That often happens in cases of financial malpractice or alleged financial malpractice. So we'll have to wait and see. But I suspect we'll be doing an awful lot of waiting. Yeah,
and probably not that much seeing for quite some time. The second Premier League though story is a much more positive one, especially if you're in the Premier League.
Yes. I think it's further indication of sort of going back to what we were saying in terms of the degree of, I think it is envy of the success of the Premier League. The Premier League is about to sign on a £488 million deal with the video games producer Electronic Arts. We said we said a few weeks ago that Electronic Arts was terminating its relationship with FIFA. The game's always been known as FIFA 96, FIFA 22, FIFA 23, and I think FIFA just kept asking for more and more money. And Electronic Arts said, we're not prepared to do that. So therefore, I think it's now going to be called Electronic Arts Soccer or Electronic Arts Football, something like that. And it's essential, therefore, that Electronic Arts has some flagship partners. And the Premier League is in prime position to exploit that. So the money's, I believe, going to be around about double what the Premier League clubs get at present. So it's going to work out as around about £4 million per club per season. 80 grand a week per club per season for the rights to use the club logos, for the rights to use the stadium pictures and so on. So it's a cracking deal and fair play to the Premier League for negotiating it. I think it's further evidence that the Premier League as a brand itself is really valuable and perhaps a bit of a shot across the bows against those clubs in the Premier League for whom signing any deal with any sponsor seems to be their ethos, and there's a danger of reducing the value of the brand overall.
I'm guessing every listener under the age of 35 is probably saying that they'll call it EA, Kieran. I don't think the young people haven't got time to say Electronic Arts.
It's fair comment.
We've talked a lot recently about multi-club ownership, Kieran. I'm not sure whether this next story counts as that or not.
Yes, sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you what, Kieran, rather than trying to be clever, as I was, and I'll just say Aston Villa have signed a partnership deal with a club in Portugal. How's that?
Sorry, I was just getting a call in from producer guy's colleagues at Five Live.
No, you really don't tell the Baroness. You will.
No,
yeah. Also, you had the pizza menu up at the same time, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. Strikes me, Kieran. You probably go for. Do you go for the same pizza every time?
Oh yes. Yeah, I've got no imagination. You realise that?
Yeah. That's fine. That's fine. Carry on.
I wear the same shoes, the same jeans, the same. Yeah, I do not change.
You
at
looked
all.
very dapper the other day, Kieran. You were wearing the Price of Football shirt, which led
Well, yeah.
several people came up to you to say, "Where's mine?"
Yes. And actually, whilst we're talking about that, apologies to people that have ordered a Price of Football shirt. There has been a slight delay in delivery. It's completely out of our hands.
Yes.
But we believe that I think they're hoping to get them shipped out on the 17th of February. But don't hold myself or Kevin to that. We will not be appearing with Finley and Smudge on some sort of glorified sleigh delivering your shirts. You'll have to rely on other means.
I'll have to wake Smudge up at first, and see. At the moment, she doesn't look like she's going to wake up for several hours. She's just had her dinner. Anyway, Kieran, let's Aston Villa. As we say goodbye to BAFTA, let's move on to Aston Villa.
Yes, Aston Villa's owners, Sawiris and Edens, they have bought 46% of the Portuguese club Vitória for around about £5 million. And this is because I think they have decided to embrace the MCO, the multi-club ownership model that we've seen operate successfully for Manchester City, and has also been applied by other clubs. And so why do that? Given that Aston Villa are clearly going to be the flagship as far as the owners are concerned. Well, there are a number of benefits of going down the multi-club route. First of all, and I'm being non-political in this, Brexit has not been good for the Premier League. First of all, you cannot sign players if they're 16 or 17 from European countries. You have to wait till they turn 18. Whereas if there's a good Belgian player or Dutch player, that player can move to Madrid or Barcelona or Munich or wherever it's going to be, because you've got freedom of movement. So if you've got a Portuguese club sort of under the umbrella of the owners and you spot them, you can sign them in the Portuguese for Vitória at the age of 16 or 17, keep them there for a couple of years, and that would allow them to then move to Villa at a later date. So that's the first advantage. Secondly, if you do spot a player who's quite talented, another issue following the changes in movements of Labour is that you need what's referred to as GBE, governing body endorsement points, and it is very much a box ticking exercise. What division is the club in? Is it playing in Europe? What's the players' wages and so on? So if you've spotted a really good player in Europe who doesn't qualify under GBE, what you do is that you bring him to your satellite club, effectively fatten them up, for a bit like fattening up a turkey for Christmas, give them a pay rise, give them the opportunity to play in a slightly higher functioning league. And Portugal is an amazing talent area, with a view again to bringing them to the UK a couple of years later. So there's Brexit benefits. There's also the benefits of having a constant culture. You've got the same sports science. You've got the same training and technical techniques being used amongst the whole of the multi-club ownership area, and it's a lot easier to bring players from those clubs, because whilst they might have to acclimatise culturally to life in the UK, at least they don't have to acclimatise to a new training regime, a new expectation in terms of diet and fitness and so on, because that will be constant throughout the group. And you can take utilisation of the loan system. If Villa have got some talented players that they want to go out to help to learn their trade, well, having clubs as part of the group works very well. And if I look at the club I support, Brighton, our owner has a interest in a Belgian club, and we signed Mitoma from Japan, sent him out for a few months to get experience of European football, then brought him back to the UK, and that helped in his development. He got more first team exposure that much quicker, and that allowed him to come into the first team in the Premier League with a greater acclimatisation.
You see, it's clearly a good deal for Villa, Kieran, but I'm guessing there are fans of Victoria who are probably less sanguine about the whole thing because it sort of casts them in the role of junior partner. And there's this assumption from Premier League teams that everyone's only too happy to be associated with them.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Kevin. And we have seen some pushback. I know when Manchester City tried to acquire a Dutch club a few months ago, there was a backlash from the Dutch fans and the deal didn't go through. So it is something to take a lot of care about because football clubs should always have their own local identity. And if fans feel that that is going to be threatened, then the chances are that they can make things awkward. So making sure that identity and that part of the local culture is also preserved should be critical for anybody thinking about going down the MCO route.
This episode of The Price of Football is brought to you by Manscaped. Join the 7 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped, the leaders in below-the-waist grooming. With our exclusive offer, go to manscaped.com and use the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL, that's Price of Football in big letters, for 20% off and free shipping.
Yes, guys, it's time to level up and fully align your hygiene routine with the most stylish and premium grooming products out there, all of which are contained in Manscaped Platinum Package 4.0. The king of this package is, of course, the Lawnmower 4.0, which offers a ceramic blade and advanced skin-safe technology to reduce cuts and nicks on your delicate bits and bobs. The Premium Package 4.0 also includes the Weed Whacker nose and ear hair trimmer, the Crop Preserver and Crop Reviver for those delicate egg-shaped devices below the waist, plus their shed travel bag and anti-chafing boxer briefs, and much more.
So get 20% off and free shipping with the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL. We've talked a fair bit, Kieran, about the proposed takeover of Charlton Athletic recently, and I'm not sure whether this next bit of news is good for Charlton fans or bad.
I suspect there's an element of both. We don't dislike Charlie Methven, but he has a group involving some LA-based investors, which was intending to acquire 90% of Charlton Athletic from Thomas Sandgaard. It then appeared that, for whatever reason, Thomas Sandgaard wasn't happy with the deal. Now, the stories that I've read is that Thomas Sandgaard initially was going to keep 10% of the club, and then that increased to 20%. But we don't know how true that is. Mr. Methven will be an angry man, as angry looking as his rose-coloured chinos, I suspect. And he's now talking about legal repercussions. He said that they paid a deposit, they had an exclusivity deal, they appointed, I think, 2 or 3 people as the management team at Charlton Athletic in December, and those people are now left as the deal appears to have collapsed. There's been a new chief executive, has subsequently appeared in the last sort of few hours at Charlton Athletic, and there's still sort of the elephant in the room with regards to any deal or any future of the club, in that the ownership of the stadium has not been resolved. So I think the Methven Group was due to pay £8.5 million for Charlton, which on the face of it seems very, very little, but that doesn't include the stadium. I don't think it includes some of the other property assets that the club uses as well.
Just as a matter of interest, Kieran, if Thomas Sandgaard, as an example, why would you retain 10% of a club rather than selling out the whole thing?
Well, it gives you it gives you two benefits. You do get a cash benefit to begin with when you sell the club, but there's also a potential upside. Let's say that Charlton go from League One to the Championship to the Premier League, and they're then worth 150, 200 million pounds. He could, as well as get the 8.5 million from selling 90%, he then picks up another 20 million from selling 10% in perhaps 4 or 5 years' time. So it's a way of keeping some skin in the game should the finances and the fortune of the club itself improve overall.
Which is not beyond the realms of improbability. It's not that long since they were a Premier League club.
Yeah, and they were there for many years.
They were indeed. Talking of takeovers, Kieran, we discussed the potential takeover at Sheffield United last week, and I think it's fair to say it divided opinion amongst Sheffield United fans. Quite a few of the Sheffield United fans got in touch with us to say thank you. We'd confirmed their suspicions about a potential dodgy takeover, but also just as many got in touch with us to say that we'd ignored other potential revenue areas that the potential new owner had. Where do we stand at the moment?
Well, this is the Nigerian gentleman, Dozie Umubwosi. Apologies if I get his name wrong there. He was planning to buy Sheffield United. I think we discussed last week that he appeared to have connections with an airline which didn't appear to have any aircraft, which is pretty fundamental. But what has come to light in the last 48 hours or so is that he's got outstanding county court judgments from renting a house in St Albans, of all places. And if he is the multi-millionaire, he's the billionaire that many of his supporters claim, you would think it wouldn't be an issue. It wouldn't be a problem for paying 30 grand's worth of rent for over a long period of time. I believe the bailiffs have been sent in by the landlord to try to get some of the money back through the sale of assets. And on Monday night, there was a statement from EFL Communications to say, yes, we have received some documentation in respect of this potential takeover. But they'd also raised quite a few queries. They had some concerns about the owner, and in respect of all of those queries, they just got complete silence. So they're not happy, and I think they've made it perfectly clear that unless significantly more evidence is given on behalf of Mr. Umwosi's acquisition, it's not going to go ahead. I think he's also an associate of a guy called Chris Cleverley, who a couple of years ago was linked to an acquisition of West Ham, and he had Rio Ferdinand as part of his team. So this would be a fantastic deal. It was a company called PAI Capital. And the circular world of unusual links in football was that Rio Ferdinand's got his own YouTube channel, and last week he was also having an interview with Dozie Umubwosi, who happens to be an associate, by all accounts, of Chris Cleverley. So there's a very sort of slightly incestuous nature to all of this, which does leave you feeling slightly concerned. There's been too many deals which have caused our eyebrows to raise. This deal hasn't gone through, and in its present form, it's not going to go through unless substantially more evidence is given to the EFL. And I think the EFL have upped their game. They've certainly changed their constitution to make it more difficult. More difficult is not the same as impossible for people of unusual motives to acquire football clubs.
That's almost exactly what my accountant, Bobby Numbers, says to me when I say, I'm not sure I can afford this. He says, well, more difficult isn't the same as impossible. And I have to say, it sort of is. We had a discussion earlier in this show, Kieran, about whether Chelsea were worth as much as Todd Boehly paid for them, whether Tottenham were worth as much as somebody's prepared to pay for them. And there's another Premier League club where the actual owners can't seem to disagree over what the club's worth.
Yes, this is Manchester United. So this show's going out on Thursday. From various sources reading the press, it looks as if Friday is going to be the date for what they refer to as a soft deadline, i.e., if you're genuinely interested, put your money on the table, make us a serious offer, and then you might get access to the data room. The Glazers are, by all accounts, looking for 6 to 8 billion. Now, when we talk about the Glazers, there are six children involved here. And it looks as if sort of the two senior ones, as far as the football is concerned, which I think is Avram and Joel, they believe that Manchester United is worth a lot of money, and probably 2 to 3 times the amount that Chelsea were sold for. Whereas the others, and I can't remember the names, it's probably something like Dave, Dozy, Beaky, Mick and Titch, or something like that. Yeah.
Grumpy Sneezy.
Apologies.
Grumpy Sneezy.
Two Glazers, if I don't know your names that well. I think they're more than happy to say, well, if it's 4 million, let's get out. Yeah, we would have made a fortune on the back of this. So Manchester United's share price has more than doubled since last August. So there's plenty of money that's been made by many people. So we'll have to wait and see. Sort of on a fundamentals in terms of valuing a business, Manchester United, even at 4 billion, to me looks a bit frothy, looks a bit high. But football is a funny industry. It is a trophy asset business. And therefore, I think a premium on top of a fundamental price will be something that somebody's willing to pay simply to be able to say to their friends, oh, by the way, I own Manchester United, stick that in your new helicopter. So we'll have to wait and see. But the Glazer brothers who think the club is worth a lot more, they don't have the money to buy out their brothers and sisters. So I think it could be some awkward chats around the fire in the Glazers or their WhatsApp groups, or however they communicate with each other these days.
Well, 2 things off the back of that, Kieran. Man United are in the Carabao Cup final with a 50-50 chance of winning that. They're not entirely out of the Premier League race. It would be unlikely, but they're not entirely out of it. We're recording this just before City and Arsenal play, and if that's a draw and United win, blah, blah, blah. So would Man United winning either of those titles add to the value of the club temporarily? And of the 6 Glazers, no matter what they're called, do they all have an equal share of the Man United pie?
In terms of success this season, the critical thing is getting into the Champions League. And the reason for that is that if they don't finish in the top 4, Adidas have the right to reduce their annual fee to Manchester United by 25%.
Right.
So Manchester United are not in the Champions League this season, and if there's 2 consecutive years, that's when the guillotine comes down. So I don't think winning something is particularly important. The money that you get for winning the Carabao Cup is something like $100,000. So it's relatively chicken feed as far as the club is concerned. It means more to the fans. In answer to your second question, they roughly have the same number of shares. There have been a few sales by individual members of the Glazer family, and the unusual thing about the share structure at Manchester United is that the shares owned by the Glazers carry 10 votes each, compared to 1 vote for everybody else. But if a Glazer sells a share to what you probably call a muggle, as far as they're concerned, those 10 votes become 1 vote. So they certainly have made money. I think a couple of the Glazer children sold shares for around about 150 million, but they've got roughly the same. One might have 17% and another one's got 15.5%. Something like that. But it's not going to make a significant difference overall.
That's interesting. There are some comedians who refer to non-comedians as muggles or civilians. I'm not sure I should have told the muggles listening to that, but I'm trying to think of a subtle, fancy way of introducing this next story, Kieran, but I'm just going to say Celtic's latest accounts are out.
Yes, Celtic, because they are a public listed company, because their shares are traded on the stock market, they have to publish accounts twice a year. And I think it's fair to say that they've had a very successful first 6 months of 22-23. And the reason for that was that they qualified for the Champions League. And although that they didn't perform particularly well on the pitch, to a large extent, that's an irrelevance. You get around about £16 million just for getting into that stage of the competition. Then you get money from the TV deal, and it's linked to sort of your progress. I think they came bottom of the group, as did Rangers. So they didn't succeed very well on the pitch, but it does show the huge impact. You make far more money from 3 matches in the Champions League than you do from a whole season as far as the SPFL is concerned. And that's simply a function of eyeballs. The Champions League is watched all around the world, and Scottish football, which is great. And it is still my ambition to go to a Rangers versus Celtic or a Celtic versus Rangers match, just to watch the crowd, as well as the football. But it doesn't generate large numbers of viewers, apart from amongst expats who are located elsewhere. So, they're solid results. They've got good control over wages. They've got zero external debt. It is a well-run club. I think they're in an awkward spot in the sense that what they have in terms of their ability to generate revenue and to sign players, they only spent about 5 or 6 million on signing players, is perfectly adequate to compete at the top of the Scottish Premiership, but it's not enough to make a serious play as far as getting out of the group stage of the Champions League is concerned.
Yeah, just one word of advice, Kieran. If you do go to a Celtic Rangers game, or indeed a Rangers Celtic game, just to keep things fair, because we know how they like to tweet. My advice is don't stand with your back to the pitch watching the fans. It will look a little bit sinister, Kieran. They'll check that out straight away, regardless of whether you're wearing a Price of Football shirt or not. Some tall teetotaler just eyeballing them won't go down particularly well. Do it more subtly than that. Get yourself a box. Do it that way. Some interesting real estate news coming out of the northeast of England, Kieran.
Yes. Just behind St James's Park is a piece of land which was owned by, I think, one of Mike Ashley's companies, but that's now been built. So that's now been bought by the new owners. It could be done as a protective exercise because whilst there's no indication yet that PIF and Amanda Staveley and the Reuben brothers, who are the owners, whilst there's no indication yet that they are planning to expand the stadium, if that is their plan at some point, and Newcastle could easily sell out 60,000 plus, they would need some room for expansion, and the worst case scenario would be if there were new owners of that plot of land, which is just behind one of the stands in the stadium, and you can't expand some of the other stands because I think there are protected buildings nearby. If it was used for retail or shopping or other forms of development. So this is a bit of future proofing. The ability to sell tickets is certainly there. The feel good factor, as we know, on Tyneside is there. So some people are putting 2 and 2 together and saying, well, this is they're convinced that this is a sign that there will be an expansion of the stadium. I think it's more of the overall strategy of the new owners, which is to have progress rather than leaps and bounds forwards in terms of spending.
I suppose part of the problem with St James's Park, Kieran, is that glorious situation slap bang in the middle of the city, which is always going to make it more difficult to expand, isn't it? Because it is right it's surrounded by the rest of the city, which is brilliant. And I suppose upwards would be the most logical situation for Newcastle, because, as you say, if their success continues exponentially, if they find themselves in the Champions League and winning trophies, their waiting list for season tickets is going to be huge.
Yes, yeah, and I've been to away matches there recently. You're already up amongst the gods.
Yeah.
So going up further, I'm not sure that would be too great. I'd probably need a Sherpa.
I recognise the tone of when I say that and you say yes. I recognise that's you getting tired and hungry, Kieran. I've known you long enough to know. So we'll get on to our last two stories, and you can get on with your pepperonis. I don't know how to say this, Kieran. The very first story we did on this pod was about Bury, and it's still rumbling on.
Yes, this was a story that I accessed 24 hours ago. There are two elements to Bury now, and this I've said this before. This for me is the saddest thing about the destruction of the club by Steve Dale, is that it's polarised the fan base. So we have AFC, the sort of the Phoenix club, which is playing in Ratcliffe, and then we have Bury FC Supporters Society, which has bought Gig Lane, and it was then proposing to join the North West Counties League to get into the pyramid. Bury's not big enough for two football clubs, and we spoke about the merger recently, and to an outside eye, if you've got one of the factions owning a football ground and no football club, and you've got another faction which has set up a football club which is doing okay but doesn't have a ground, why not get together? But the Bury FC people had a vote, and it didn't go through the necessary threshold, and things are pretty tetchy between the two sets. So there was a report in a newspaper. I'm not even going to name the newspaper. I work in the city of Liverpool. It is held in contempt in this city. I'll say no more. A couple of weeks ago, saying there's been a 260-page report about the Bury FC Supporters Society going forwards and progressing and so on. So by all accounts, they have had an application to join the North West Counties. My sources, and I will protect them. I have no connection with Bury AFC in terms of the board of directors there. My sources say that it's been rejected, and part of the reason why it's been rejected is that there were concerns of governance. It looks like some people have leaked the proposal documents. This 260-page document. They're happy to release it to journalists or journalist in the loosest word use of the word, but not to their own members. So that there are issues, I think, between the board of the Supporters Society and the members. And the other issue was that in order to be accepted, you have to have a credible business plan. And from what I've heard, and this may be wrong, so yeah, I'm open to be corrected on this. They weren't convinced by the numbers. I think there was the view was that some of the calculations were very optimistic in terms of the ability to generate money, and therefore it's been rejected. So we still have Gig Lane, and I know work has been done, and fair play to the people that have done that. But we still have Gig Lane, which at this present moment in time is not going to be hosting football again next season. And the trouble is, every year that it doesn't host football, it's one step further away from, I think, what is the view of all Bury fans, if they just want the one club in the one ground with the one set of good memories that they all can share together.
Yeah, and also it's 1 year's worth more expense, isn't it, to get the ground back up to speed. Now, our last story, Kieran, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but producer Guy and I, we've had a chat because we've been slightly worried about you, because in our fictional sitcom Price of Football world, as opposed to the real world, in our fictional world, you'll have been moping this week about Tracy Crouch getting married. We know that, but we know that you're the most happily married man in the world. You've got a lovely, house and a lovely dog. But the Tracy Crouch news will have knocked you back. So producer Guy and I thought, what else can we do except finish with a story that is really going to cheer Kieran up? Is there any chance that Chris Kirchner, perhaps, is in trouble with the law? And lo and behold, fill your boots.
Yes, for people who don't recall Chris Kirchner, he was the preferred bidder of the Derby County Administrators Quantumar, of whom I wasn't always fulsome of praise. And then, it seemed a bit strange. He seemed to come from nowhere. He had no digital footprint apart from some strange photographs. We've seen that Twitter account, Steve Bruce at Weddings. Well, Chris Kirchner had something similar. He kept appearing at golf tournaments next to famous golfers, and he always appeared to be wearing the same shirt. It was just a very sort of bizarre thing. And the deal was supposed to go through, and then it was delayed. And I think we'd said, okay, we know how this is going to end. And of course, it ended in tears. And now he's subject to an investigation, and I believe charges from the FBI with regard to what they call wire fraud. I never quite understood what wire fraud is, but it appears to be that he sent 35, and I've actually got the court documents in front of me, but I can't put them out on social media. He appeared to wire $35 million to a bank account, which perhaps shouldn't have gone there. That money appears to have been used to buy an aircraft, which, if you've got a company which isn't paying wages, buying a private aircraft for one of the executives, the optics of that aren't too good. So there was this private jet, and then £800,000 was transferred to bank accounts that Chris Kirchner happened to control. And all the time, there's people being unpaid, there's people not receiving their wages. So it looks as if there has now been an arrest warrant in respect of Chris Kirchner, and we await to see developments. And I look forward to how this progresses. And it will be slow, and there will be lawyers involved, as we would expect. But Derby County, you dodged a bullet with Chris Kirchner, is my conclusion, as did Preston North End. And I know that Peter Ridsdale is a gentleman that some people take issue with at times, and you can understand perhaps the unhappiness of some Leeds fans. But Peter Ridsdale actually phoned me up and say, by the way, Chris Kirchner, he tried to buy Preston, and we rumbled him. I'll say no more than that.
As we know, Kieran, from producer Guy, some people have very credible explanations for buying a private jet. And all I can say is to Mrs. Producer Guy, that must be the best Valentine's Day present she's ever had. Next week, we'll be speaking to sports lawyer Tom Murray, who specialises in the financial regulation of sport, especially football, and he's happy to answer your questions. So send yours in, and we'll put as many to him as we can during our interview. Thank you to everyone who's donated to Pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod and join them, that would be very kind of you. You can do so by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. And if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And that includes those questions to sports lawyer Tom Murray. So questions@priceoffootball.com. And if you are having a question for Tom, if you could put that in a subject thing, that would be very kind of you. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you as always to everybody that supports the show in a myriad of ways, one of which is Patreon. It's very kind and generous of you, and for all those people that have interacted with us. And I know that there was a mixed response to the Sheffield United story, and that's how it should be. We don't do the show to get likes. But there's another way in which you can support the show, and by all accounts, it just involves going onto your app and giving the show a review. It helps us in the charts. It helps us with algorithms. And also, when we are approaching people to come on the show, that's one of the first things they do. They look at the show, they look at the number of episodes, and then they start to look at the reviews and the number of views. By all accounts, however, as far as the algorithm is concerned, it doesn't matter what you say. So therefore, you could even say you would rather have the show presented by Norman Stanley Fletcher and Chris Kirchner. We would find one bit.
What a sitcom that would be. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.